I've been thinking about my childhood a lot lately. I vividly remember Sonic Shuffle being played on my brother's Dreamcast, me teething on my brother's Dreamcast controller, moving a whole bunch without knowing why, this cool little snippet, and wrestling for some reason. Why would I bring these specific memories to you today? Well, aside from the fact that I really like Sonic the Hedgehog, in full transparency, it's because this is a video about my favorite story pillars in the 2003 adaptation of Fullmetal Alchemist. I repeat, this is a video about the 2003 adaptation of Fullmetal Alchemist. One more time, this is a full spoiler video about the 2003 adaptation.
Pray in faith that ye may be saved.
I have a few story pillars, or skeletons one might say, to introduce, complete with anecdotes that will help make my interest in this series make sense. In wrestling, there's a role that a player can portray known as the heel. A heel can be defined as the bad guy in a scenario, the one who antagonizes the audience, the player who is designed to be, in a sense, hated. I had this idea programmed into my brain due to the mindless hours watching WWE with my father, but it came full circle in 2016 with the release of Pokemon Sun and Moon, the 7th generation of Pokemon. Let me backtrack. In 2002, the 3rd generation of Pokemon saw the release of Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire and the starter Pokemon Torchic, who would evolve into the fire-fighting giant chicken man known as Blaziken. Blaziken, to put it mildly, was cool as hell. A great type combination and an amazing design. Perhaps thinking that lightning could strike twice in the same place, upon the release of Pokemon Diamond and Pearl in 2006, also known as Generation 4, we were introduced to the starter Pokemon Chimchar, who would evolve into the fire-fighting monkey man, Infernape. Okay, neat. Infernape was also a nifty design, so everyone kinda let it slide. However, in 2010, the 5th generation saw the release of Pokemon Black and White and the fire starter Tepig, who evolved into Emboar, another fire fighting type.
Wait, no, wait, what?
That's 3 in a row, Game Freak. What's going on here? Well, it was a bit better in Generation 6 when we saw the release of Pokemon X and Y and the fire type starter Fennekin, who evolved into the fire psychic type Delphox. Though that came with a separate set of problems, it was a welcome reprieve. But in 2016, when the final form of the starters for Sun and Moon were released, the fire type Litten evolved into Incineroar, a giant wrestler catman who definitely looks like you can pay rent one way or another was revealed. A wrestling fire type starter. Does that mean another fire fighting type? The type combination that players were vocally against at this point. No, not at all actually. Game Freak did something genius here. See, each Pokemon has a descriptor attached to its name, and Incineroar had two things. A descriptor as the heal Pokemon and a fire-dark typing. Incineroar was conceptualized to be a troll in a sense. It was meant to antagonize players, even if for a moment. This wrestler isn't a fighter, and you were ridiculous for thinking so. And the heal Pokemon is a dark type, a prankster, someone who isn't afraid to fight dirty, as the dark type is called the evil type in Japan. And to make matters worse, it was, and still kind of is, an amazing Pokemon to use in competitive play. Incineroar is a Pokemon that existed to shake up the Pokemon world, as a heel does in the world of wrestling. and its moveset and inclusion in other games such as Super Smash Bros. Ultimate allows us to see that a heel, or perhaps a villain, makes any story more compelling. But is a story only as good as its villain? As good as its heel? I dare say it isn't always. And a shining example of this can be seen in Fullmetal Alchemist 2003, where our main villain, while seemingly pulling the strings throughout the series, including how many of our adjacent antagonists move, doesn't add much depth to the series. I'll return to this later, as our secondary antagonists add many philosophical questions and concepts to the mix. But know for now that the grand antagonist for Fullmetal Alchemist 2003, Dante, isn't compelling on a personal note, but entertaining for her pettiness. And while she does have a hand in the journey of our protagonists Edward and Alphonse Elric, it is the boys themselves who make Fullmetal Alchemist's story move along. Let's look at a recent example of how the heel doesn't outweigh the protagonist, where the villain doesn't make the story as impressive as the protagonist moving through their hero's journey. Let's briefly discuss Kendrick Lamar and Aubrey Graham. Aubrey Graham, better known as Drake, has been a controversial individual in the music scene for several years, between his alleged ghostwriters that make him hit songs to his alleged abuse, manipulation, and theft from other artists to his alleged misconduct with people under the age of 18. Drake has continually pushed the envelope until he made a fatal mistake. He inadvertently began a rap beef with critically acclaimed rapper Kendrick Lamar. Without going into the beef too much, as it's already been analyzed time and again, Kendrick Lamar essentially dominated Drake with his numerous songs, such as Meet the Grams and Not Like Us, the latter winning 5 Grammy Awards. Though Drake in this real-world scenario is effectively the heel, his music paled in comparison to Lamar's lyricism. Yes, Drake is unlikable, but the beef became less of what Drake had to say and more of how Kendrick Lamar was going to weave his wordplay, his mastery of beats, and his intelligence of his current nemesis together. Everyone wanted Drake to get dunked on, but more than anything, we wanted more music from Kendrick Lamar. Any retaliation from Drake was irrelevant. Despite his many misgivings, he wasn't the point of interest. Instead, it all fell on Kendrick Lamar, who continued to give the people what they wanted. Now, 1 year later, Kendrick is going on tour with SZA, his latest album GNX has been met with universal acclaim, and he remains the only relevant party, as he was more than a decade before this beef began, in what can only be called one of the greatest decimations of all time.
Back into this adorable form.
That one again? You love making yourself look young.
So, I had this whole section written out about the Femboy Hooters meme that I thought would be hilarious, but it would have derailed the whole video. I just have 2 things to say. I can admit that between his preferred appearance and every iteration of his voice, whether it be Japanese, German, English, or Spanish,
Don't play dumb, you know who I mean. The bastard who made me the way you made greed and pride.
this literal gender fluid man Envy is by far the hottest character in Fullmetal Alchemist 2003. He is also the best wild card the series has to offer, just like the Femboy Hooters meme itself.
And I would have died too, if not for them. And it's time I gave my share and made my own choice.
What warrants a satisfying ending? And is a satisfying ending a good one? Apologies in advance, but I will have to spoil a film to explore this before we get into our Fullmetal Alchemist 2003 dive any further. Next, let's look at Alejandro Jodorowsky's Santa Sangre. I will keep this brief since there is very little footage I can show from this movie given its graphic nature. Essentially, a young boy named Phoenix lives in a circus, and both of his parents, a serial cheater of a father and a controlling religious fanatic of a mother, are both killed. As Phoenix becomes an adult, he's still traumatized by these events and sees his mother outside of a mental institution he's been living in. He follows her and, after some persuasion, begins a killing spree, murdering every woman he comes in contact with. Ultimately, it is revealed that his mother was an extension of his own psyche, and as the police close in on him, we know that while he is going to be apprehended for his crimes, he is freed from his parental shackles, as he happily states that his hands are his rather than anyone else's. It's sad, yes, but it's also satisfying. As we see Phoenix gain a sense of self, an agency that he has denied his entire life finally come to him. By the way, this is a video on Fullmetal Alchemist 2000. I am a fan of the Fallout series. In Fallout, you play the role of a vault dweller, hundreds of years after a nuclear apocalypse. When you emerge from your cryosleep, or no matter what game you play, Vault, where you have existed all this time, you go on a journey that, in a sense, feels planned out for you. Not only in the form of, yes, the developers wanted me to do this, but also like someone is pulling the strings behind the scenes. We can see this in Fallout 4, where the leader of the Institute is none other than the son that we have been searching for the entire game, who has planned everything to the point where we would meet him and ultimately work with him to create a better commonwealth for the masses. I, in my childhood, felt something similar. Everything I did, everywhere I went, was the result of someone higher than me. My agency was essentially a non-factor, though I didn't have any way of articulating that. It wasn't until I was a full-grown adult that my mother admitted to me that every move we made was for the simple reason that we were poor and couldn't always stay in one place for very long. I thanked her for her hard work, ensuring we always had a roof over our heads, but I was also reminded of something else. The Elric brothers that I always related to, they who always went from place to place, simply following a lead to get to their ultimate goal, felt similar to what I had experienced in what was ultimately keeping a home until I became an adult who was able to provide for myself. And again, Mom, if you are watching this, thank you for everything. But my mind always went specifically to Fullmetal Alchemist 2003 simply because it was the anime I remember seeing advertisements on as a young child of 7 or 8 years old on TV. It was just so cool. Now let's delve into Fullmetal Alchemist 2003, starting with our final pillar. Fullmetal Alchemist is an anime based on the manga of the same name, written and illustrated by Hiromu Arakawa. While the manga would be published between 2001 and 2010, the adaptation we will be discussing began serialization in 2003. Yes, by the time the anime was running its course, there were around 7 or 8 volumes by its end, out of what would ultimately be 27. Fullmetal Alchemist would receive a second adaptation that adapted the manga in its entirety from 2009 to 2010, titled Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood. It would go on to cement itself as one of the greatest anime of all time in many anime fans' eyes. And yes, Brotherhood is really amazing. But to discuss Fullmetal Alchemist 2003, is to discuss everything we've gone through in our time together thus far. It is to describe character journeys, characters themselves, antagonists, endings, but also what it means to make an adaptation. Fullmetal Alchemist has several components that make it a great watch, but one of the best is that Arakawa apparently knew that she wasn't going to be done with her manga anytime soon, and had the creative team take their own route to ending the 2003 anime. This had two effects. Upon its completion, the anime was met with some confusion but overall praise. However, once Brotherhood released, 2003 began to accrue several detractors for not being faithful to the source material. It was under fire for doing what it sought out to do, and due to it not being a faithful remake, it was considered by some to be a poor adaptation. But let's look into the word adaptation. An adaptation is a movie, television drama, or stage play that has been adapted from a written work, typically a novel. However, as someone who views pieces of media as something organic, I also look at the biological definition of adaptation, that being a change or the process of change by which an organism or species becomes better suited to its environment. Just for a moment, imagine you are a skateboarder. As many people do, you've worn your trousers to the skate park. However, you know all too well the pain of falling face first in a trick that doesn't land, or you lose balance. So what do? One of potentially two things. You either tie a shoestring across your waist where your belt would be, or you don't put a belt on at all. You're safe. Well, safer. Your pelvis may not thank you, as it doesn't realize the danger it was in, and it will never have to. Fullmetal Alchemist 2003 does something similar. In its attempt to stand on its own, it creates its own narrative around pieces of the story that Arakawa touches on in less detail and paves its own path in an attempt to tell an organic and coherent story. It adapts and molds itself with what it is given.
When you realize one thing, there are no unexplainable events.
I've really built up to this, haven't I? Okay, let's start from the beginning. Fullmetal Alchemist, in all renditions, follows alchemists Edward and Alphonse Elric, two brothers who are attempted to try and regain their bodies after performing human transmutation to bring their mother back to life, a taboo in the world of alchemy that costs Ed his left leg and Al his entire body. Though, to bring Al back to the world of the living, Ed binds Al's soul to a suit of armor at the cost of his right arm. This leads to several story beats that persist amongst the three pieces of media, such as Ed joining the military, the Shao Tucker incident, the May Hughes incident, and the boys' reunion with their teacher, Azumi, who also attempted human transmutation to bring her stillborn child back to life. But 2003 diverges from its cohorts with the introduction of Dante. Dante on her own serves as the true antagonist of 2003, as she is the one who keeps Ed and Al on a string without their knowledge, guiding their every move with the help of the homunculi, all of whom are created from failed human transmutations and are looking at Ed and Al being their best bet at creating a Philosopher's Stone, a tool that will let them become human, and let Dante have eternal life. Dante is also the ex-lover of Hohenheim of Light, Ed and Al's father, who he walked out on after coming to a disagreement on her exploits. If we look at the Drake example, Dante, despite being an active player, is treated almost as a non-factor, being introduced properly more than halfway through the show's 51-episode run, and holding major relevance less than 15 episodes before the show ends. Though I like her, I can admit she's kind of boring. What keeps the momentum going is Ed and Al's journey to get their bodies back and their run-ins with the homunculi in the military. Speaking of the homunculi, and going back to my point earlier, they're actually given a wide range of depth in this series, rather than simply playing into what they're named after, the 7 deadly sins. They also have their own aspirations. Memories of past lives and how they got to where they are, knowing that they're failed transmutations. Each homunculi has a reason for doing what they are doing, a different desire for being human. Well, almost all of them. Please indulge me a little bit longer. When we drive past the McDonald's that is Dante's conceited and lofty goal for lasting life, alongside her rather petty methodology, we end up making a hard stop at the Femboy Hooters because envy is an absolute menace. Drink up, boys! Envy is perhaps the homunculus who lives up to his name better than any other, even gluttony, and that guy just straight up eats people. Envy in Fullmetal Alchemist 2003 couldn't care less about what everyone else has going on, because all he has is beef with Hohenheim for being the equivalent of a deadbeat dad, as envy is the failed transmutation of Dante and Hohenheim's child, and beef with the Elric brothers for the sole reason that Hohenheim had more kids. Envy, more than Dante, has so much hatred in his heart that he is the ultimate scene stealer. And what makes him so good is that we know early on that he is what we would categorize as a bad guy, as he is actively working with the bad guys as early as episode 2. But envy, after each on-screen appearance, becomes far more interesting because we learn, more than any other characters, he's increasingly antagonistic. He isn't just a shapeshifter. We learn that he's sadistic, he's angry, and he's about to make it everyone's problem because he has zero regard for human life. Lust, sloth, and wrath are all interesting and compelling in their own right, given their exploration of what being human means and what drives their individual desire to become human, giving the show some of its best plot lines, moments, and questions. I include this point to say, don't expect to find the Puppet Master more entertaining than the puppets. This goes doubly for our wanderers, Ed and Al. Throughout the story, they are met with failure after failure after failure. We watch them as they go through this increasingly harrowing and depressing journey, and aside from Ed being the titular Fullmetal Alchemist, the show simply wouldn't be the same without these two. Not simply because they are considered pawns by Dante, the homunculi, and potentially the audience by the halfway point, but also because at its core, this is a story of two young brothers whose morality is questioned and tested multiple times in an attempt to regain what they've lost. They are indeed going place to place, like children lost and unsure of what answers await, but they know they have to keep moving no matter what circumstance lies before them. More than the homunculi and Dante, they are the heart of Fullmetal Alchemist. As I've weaved all these points together slowly but surely, I want to take a hard stop to look at the ending of 2003, as I wanted it to be the final part of this video. As we've discussed the Wanderer, adaptations, and the Heel, the concept of the unsatisfactory ending is one that has been explored in film criticism for decades. Here it also reigns, as there are several people who do not like 2003's ending, and for understandable reasons. For many, the ending, which sees Ed in an alternate world following his sacrifice to save Al, seems like it comes out of left field. And more than anything, the boys, who promised to stay together no matter what, are obscenely far apart. It's sad, it's seemingly random, but to me, it's genius. Throughout the series, the notion of equivalent exchange, something cannot be created without giving something in return, goes from a universal truth to something that is thrown into question quite frequently. It tests the boys' conviction and challenges everything they've come to learn and accept. It seems to be increasingly baseless, and in the end, for Al to get his body back, he loses his memory of the time he spent in the armor searching for the Philosopher's Stone with Ed and can't even see his brother. To the very end, Ed and Al are challenged and ultimately must concede that the world doesn't work the way they thought it did. There was no perfect outcome for them after what they did. All of this may point to what could be an unsatisfactory ending. However, given how it was built and interwoven throughout the series, it is the exact opposite to me. For what Fullmetal Alchemist 2003 crafted, its ending, through its vagueness and open nature, made sense for it and it alone. That's what makes it such a special adaptation. It went for something different, something special, and to its merit, it certainly achieved it, and a degree of closure. And that is always appreciated in storytelling of any kind. Thank you, as always, for watching this video. If you've made it this far, please consider liking the video and subscribing, and leave a comment below so that I can get ideas on what to do next. Until next time.